Welcome to my presentation on underground sensings. I'm Johannes Birringer, choreographer based in Houston and London. And my talk is about fieldwork conducted last year. Let me begin with a small painting I made, inspired by Kafka and my reading of The Burrow, an unfinished short story written shortly before his death. The painting comes from my physical practice, sensing my aging body, how it stretches and dilates. I try to feel and imagine my body every day during my warm-ups. And I remember that someone whose theater writings I admired in the 1980s had delved into burrowing as a potential parable for an acting theory, or rather a speculative theory of a kind of vanishing, disappearance and reappearance on some stage or frame of consciousness. The body is such a somatic ghost. It is there and not there. I have forgotten the acting theory now. We are at the end of the time, or the line, as Anat Singh argues in her beautiful new book on Matsutake and living in the ruins of capitalism. Thinking about somatic toolkits and how to develop sensory methods in art and anthropology, I remember burrowing, crawling in the dust of stage, of landscape, in the outdoors, in coal mines, in the desert hills, in caves. The small drawing, made first by an illustrator in the 1920s, who's also an avid reader of Kafka, was being inspired by a poem by Georg Trakl. The illustrator then drew a Kafkaesque figure, contorted low down, somewhat elongated. I'm interested in the lowering and why the underground is associated with darkness and death, and how tunnels often are considered dangerous, hidden, surreptitious, secretive, furtive. In the following, I will narrate from my fieldworks and probably focus on 2 of 3 sites that we explored. Early morning in February, we meet at the entrance of the plant where we descend into the rice tunnel system. Harvey, the engineer, will be our guide. He takes us past the noise room of the plant where heavy turbines labor towards the stairs into the tunnels underneath Rice University campus in Houston. The noise is overwhelming. Our group descends one by one. I'm the last. Soon have lost track as it becomes quiet. The group moves swiftly. I'm left behind. That was on purpose, so I could begin to feel alone in the underground tunnel with its pipelines. Left, steam; right, chilled water, or vice versa. There are also electrical cables and, from the older recent days, network fiber optics cables. Archaeologically speaking, we move from newest tunnels, wider, to older tunnels, narrower, to very old tunnels, very narrow, built 10 to 30 to 80 years ago. Our movement will perhaps not reach the oldest corridors as they are so tight and wet and thus less passable. Today, we're not cavers, only tunnel walkers. Heading into the labyrinth, as I've lost touch with the group and can only hear faint noise of words receding, I have to make guesses to the right, then left, then right again, then straight, back and forward again. Tunnels are geometric, linear, straightforward and uneventful, the same ad infinitum. Pipes on the left, pipes on the right. At some point, one reaches what the engineers strangely call the ballroom. I see no dancers, but
one has a little space to turn, admire graffiti and wall paintings, and listen to the periodic severe crackling of condensation as it gets trapped.
Trapping noise. This is the most beautiful sensation I imagine hearing. Crackle music, sonic distortion. Over the last decades, musicians try to break audio media to produce such cracked sounds. Here, the tunnels offer quite casually such an extended sound palette, including tiny trickles, whispers, water drops.
As one looks and looks and does not see much, apart from one long corridor where student invaders have left their graffiti cave paintings. Charlie was here. Tommy loves Brian. Fuck everything. I miss Hannah. Vous ne savez rien.
Water and steam and electrical grid are running there as I walk up and down aimlessly. Valves draw tension, sand and dirt on the piping. Some older rusty metal pipes are wet, as if sweating. I imagine all this as flesh and bones, fluid systems, a vast underground. A labyrinth with thread-like hyphae, mycelia. The floor is not fungal, but concrete. Some holes in the ceiling mean there are manholes to provide exit to the above. Strange word, manhole. Below, closed loop systems. I end up waiting patiently for the quiet. My second site, I can only mention very briefly, the Houston Cistern water reservoir has two parts of our field trip. First, dedicated to the structure, our guide, Rosemary, lively woman narrating all the way back to the 19th century, how the city began needing water, how the early townspeople built this water reservoir, and then how it was decommissioned in 2007 after a leak was discovered. This beautiful historical site, bound to be demolished, but then Buffalo Bayou Park rescued it and restored it into a public space for tourism and a program of changing art installations. So reservoir art, we took our tour walking into what the artist Carlos Cruz Diez had created, spatial chromo interference. And I became particularly interested in the phenomenon of the echo in the cistern, and also looking at, from the perimeter that we were allowed to walk on, at the 221 tall concrete columns, which stand a few inches of water on the floor of the reservoir. The tour was announced as moving color chromatic modulations, and making us as participants who had to wear these white lab coats become an essential component of the artwork. I looked into the modulations, and their motion did not much to inspire me, although I did dance at one point for the camera. Mostly I looked at the walls, the concrete, cement. But there was no sound, so we had to generate it. The third site, ancient cave near San Antonio. It turns out the natural bridge, the name of the cave, has to do with that thin arcing rock above the canopy sort of formation that then leads us down to the entrance of the cave. After a cool corridor gently sloping for the descent, providing a first glimpse of the rocky maze ahead, we come to a glass door, and our guide, Destiny, her name, tells us that the temperature will change and it will become much warmer as we climb deeper into the cave, which at some point I begin to imagine the acid dripping monster in Ridley Scott's Alien appearing above me. But there are breathtaking underground vistas slowly opening up, step by careful step. And soon one notices the drippings and droppings that have created part of the formations. Long-winded, narrow tunnels and some large chambers open up as we go nearly 250 feet down. Our groups record the environment, the drippings, the limestone, sedimentary rock, and the lakes have formed underneath. And of course, we look at these leftovers from ancient times, stalactites, tapering structures, hanging like icicles from the roof of a cave, or the stalagmites rising from the floor. Geologists think that during the Cretaceous period, a warm, shallow sea covered much of Texas. Sediments and dead marine organisms collected on the ocean floor then compacted and formed the different limestone. More mysterious are the irregular volumes, wide and narrowing, falling off. Then there are these beautiful chambers that are named by the site managers with very suggestive titles. Purgatorio, Valley of the Fallen Lords, Castle of the White Giants. There is Pluto's anteroom, followed, strangely, by Sherwood Forest. Now I begin to feel at home with the charming underworld metaphors derived from epic literatures. I wait for Destiny to turn away as she switches off the lights to Grendel's Canyon. I want to film the deep dark. In conclusion, I will try to sum up some of my Somatechnics concepts now. Wir suchen überall das Unbedingte und finden immer nur die Dinge, writes the Romantic poet Novalis at the end of the 18th century. With things, Novalis, I believe, also associates plants. The idea of plants seems to promise growth and life, but in Novalis' lyrical romantic interpretation of life, death is also always present from the beginning, the threshold of which is symbolized by the night. Life and death are developed into entwined concepts. Death is the romantic principle of life, an underground principles. And yet, as the new wave of materialism reveals to us, matters have not only gained weight, but also vibrancy and vitality. The unromantic, lively think power Jane Bennett writes about when she speaks of material assemblages, ever rethinged, dragged up. At one point, she speaks of confederations. And there are other echoes here of theories and aesthetics of interaction. What concerns me is not only the awareness of elemental materiality, but sensory awareness and deep listening to the ground and environment. Images and sounds are precarious in the era of disturbed assemblages when erosion drains the colors of earth and of weather. If choreography means kinetic and proprioceptive somatechnical awareness of moving through and moving with, then how could a knowledge of orientation help us to address the physical, spatial, and material relations of assemblage, lines of life? Well, when I mention the lines of life and now look at the rehearsals we did, in analogy to forest knowledge, as Anna Tsing calls it, or cave knowledge, we were interested by the cracks on the floor and the rhythms of tracking our way between earth and sky, what we remember deep in the limestone cave or just under the concrete roof of the water reservoir, listening to the wind, the steam traps, beholding in the dark. We brought back what we had captured. We tried to then remember it through our bodies. And in the kinetic atmospheres that I build as installations with my DAP-Lab ensemble and with people that I work with, I ask the dancers to inhabit the atmosphere and then invite visitors into the various spheres of the atmosphere, seducing them to touch the images and listen to the elemental presences that can generate affective connections and sentient perception of an emerging atmosphere, as if it were an affective ontology. We are becoming atmosphere in these reverberant spaces. So for me, kinetic atmospheres are both unpredictable, emergent, and engineered. I'm playing a second small sample called arm fronds, and these are the bark from palm trees in Texas, and we had them in a rehearsal and we recorded dancers touching them and moving with them, and also touching other materials in the space, whether they were wood or stone. So drawing the audience in our under gallery to these very subtle sounds and echoes, we're also trying to draw them into grasping the current ecological precarity in an interpandemic era. The underground yields transmissions of energies that enable deeper explorations and experiences. Psychic spaces of the real, real distancing, unreal fear, and of the surreal. Atmosphere, like the experience of light, is air, is weather, is moisture, is invisible and visible, and it is experienced as manipulable and sometimes as very dangerous. And say that again. This is a steam trap.
It's on this side right here.
Yes.
This little bucket.
Okay.
It's a steam trap. Traps the steam and then lets the water come and condensates and go back to the plant to make steam again.
Okay. It's a beautiful system here. Do you come here often or?
Mondays and Fridays. We check the leaks.
Okay. Harvey checks the leaks every day. And I remember now the little light that was trickling down in the tunnels, or the trickling sound in the cave, and as if the darkness in front of a hidden moon troubled the rays from getting out of the covering, and it alerted me, and I hope our visitors too, that sense of the unseen, and perhaps our blind need to care for, to behold, to care for our earth. Thank you for your attention.